Sometimes when we're reading a book, we might want to take a peek at the end just to see how it all turns out, if everything turns out right. Well, when you're reading the Bible, you can do that too. And it's actually maybe a good thing to do. Everything turns out right in the end, in the future, and that is our hope. And so today I want to talk about things that went wrong in Genesis, and these things are made right at the end, which is still to come in the future. So the book of Genesis, you know, is the first book of the Bible, and that word Genesis means beginning. And so let's look at 7 or maybe 8 things that are in Genesis, and then we get them made right in Revelation. Okay, so Genesis 1:1 is the very first verse in the Bible. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And that one little verse tells us a lot, that there's this amazing creator, and he created everything that we see around us. But then in Revelation 21, verse 1, it says, "Then I, John, saw a new heaven and a new earth." So everything has to be renewed at the end. It's not going to be a whole new planet, but everything has to be made new and made clean, because obviously between Genesis and Revelation, something has got messed up very badly. So it has to be fixed. So we have ruling or reigning or governing in Genesis, and we have it in Revelation as well. Genesis 1:28. God blessed Adam and Eve and said to them, "Rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So God told the first 2 people, Adam and Eve, to take charge over the animals. And they did that for a while, but then as we know the story, they messed up. And then in Revelation 22, verse 5, it says that's going to be we will reign as kings forever and ever. And that's on the earth. So we will be taking charge over the nations, which are people, not animals, obviously. The nations of people, and that's Revelation 2:26. Did you know that it actually says that the Lord God planted a garden? Wow, I hadn't realized that he actually planted this garden, or it could be an orchard as well, maybe a fruit tree orchard. A garden or an orchard in the east in Eden. And that's why, of course, it's called the Garden of Eden. And in Revelation 2:7, we have God's garden again. "To the one who is victorious, the one who has the victory, I will give the privilege of eating from the tree of life, which is in God's garden," or paradise. That's another word for a garden. That's what paradise means. And that will be, of course, on the earth. So remember in Genesis, they got kicked out of the Garden of Eden because of sin. They messed up. They disobeyed. They did the one thing that God told them not to do, which was eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so they had to leave the garden. But in Revelation, we get to be in the garden, in God's garden. Okay, and we mentioned already the tree of life, which is or was in God's garden. So in Genesis 2:9, the Lord God made all kinds of trees grow from the soil, every tree that was beautiful to look at and good for food. The tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil were in the middle of the orchard. But remember, they were told, "Don't eat." And in Revelation 22:2, on each side of the river was the tree of life, producing 12 crops of fruit, giving fruit every month. This is an amazing tree. Imagine a tree that produces fruit every month, whether it's 12 different kinds of fruit or 12 times the same fruit. I don't know, but that's pretty amazing. And it's also noticed that this tree is on each side of the river, so it must be a very big tree that somehow spans this river. Anyway, we can imagine what that might be like. It's amazing. You may eat from this tree in the end, in the future. So to everyone who is victorious, I will give the privilege of eating from the tree of life. So in Genesis, don't eat it. But in Revelation, in the future, we may eat from the tree of life, which sounds quite amazing. Okay, we have a river in Genesis 2:10. A river flows from Eden to water the garden. Well, it makes sense. Revelation 22:1. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life as clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb and flowing in the center of the city's main street. So this is not just any ordinary river in Revelation in the future. This is the river of the water of life. So somehow this river produces life. Somehow, maybe if you drink it, or anyway, it's quite amazing. And it's also as clear as crystal. And somehow it flows out from the throne of God and the Lamb. And somehow it flows down the center of this street, which will be amazing to look at. Okay, we had in Genesis the curse when things went wrong. So God says, since you ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. Through hard labor you will eat food from the ground all the days of your life. It will grow thorns and thistles for you, though you will eat of its grain. So we have awful things like thorns and thistles, and we often talk about poison ivy. That's a curse in this part of the world. And in Revelation 22:3, though, there will no longer be any curse, punishment of what they did wrong. And then, of course, that leads to death. So Genesis 3:3, you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or else you will surely die. But in Revelation 21:4, there will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. So finally, we get rid of that, the worst thing. Okay, so here's a summary. In Genesis, we had the heavens and earth that God created, and in Revelation, we have a renewed heaven and earth. Genesis, we had ruling, but it was over animals, and in Revelation, we will be ruling or governing people. In Genesis, we had God's garden, but they had to get out, remember? And Revelation, God's garden, but come in. And Genesis, the tree of life, don't eat it. In Revelation, the tree of life, please eat it. And the river in Genesis. But in Revelation, it's a special river, the river of the water of life. And then this one we didn't mention, but in Genesis, God was actually with them. It says they heard the sound of him walking in the garden in the cool of the evening. But they hid from him because they were ashamed, because they had disobeyed. But in Revelation, God will be with us, and it says he will be our God, and we will be his people, and he will stay with us. And we don't need to hide from him because we won't need to be ashamed of anything. In Genesis, we had the curse. We had the punishment for disobeying. In Revelation, there will be no more curse, it says. In Genesis, we had death, which was the ultimate punishment. In Revelation, it says there will be no more death. So we talk about the 3 R's, and this is not reading, writing, and arithmetic. This is renewal, rebirth, and restoration. So R-E, re, means to do it again, like redo. I'm going to redo it. That means I'll do it again, or retry, or maybe repair. Do it again, do it over. So it's like a reset. God says in Revelation 21:5, look, I'm making everything new. So this is renewal. Rebirth, we will have this. In the rebirth of the world, the Son of Man, that's Jesus, will sit on his throne. That's Matthew 19:28. And restoration, restore, means to put everything back right. So Jesus must remain in heaven now until the time for the restoration of all things. And that's Acts 3:21. Which is an easy one to remember because we call it 3-2-1 countdown. So it's 3:21, 3-2-1 countdown. That's the countdown until the restoration of all things, when God will make everything right that went wrong in Genesis.